Welcome to Bear Archery's Hunting 101 podcast, where hunters new and old come to learn and find inspiration from stories of hunts gone by. Everyone is welcome to enjoy the outdoor way of life, and there is no better time to start than right now. So let's head into the great outdoors with your host, Dylan Ray.
All right, guys, welcome to Bear Archery's Hunting 101 podcast. I am coming to you with four guys who probably, when it comes to shooting a recurve, probably I have more knowledge on this podcast than maybe I'll ever have again. So I'm excited to just have fun telling stories with these guys, and I'm going to go around and let each one of them introduce themselves and where they're coming to us from. Start with you, Jim.
Okay, yeah, I'm Jim Willems. I live in Farmington, New Mexico. I grew up in Kansas and still have a place in Kansas, so I kind of bounce back and forth between the two. So that allows me to hunt whitetails in Kansas and Nebraska in late fall, and then I try to hunt Colorado, Arizona, Utah, New Mexico, Wyoming, all that stuff in the early fall.
Now, Jim is the past president of Pope and Young. He's been on the show several times, so he's a pretty familiar voice, a good friend of mine. I like it when he's down in Kansas because he's the guy that watches me shoot my recurve and tells me how bad I am at it. So corrects me on all the things I'm doing wrong. How about you, Clay?
Clay Hayes. Live most of the time up in North Idaho. I'm sitting down in Florida right now. I grew up down here, and for the past couple of years been coming down here in the winter hunting hogs and fishing and all that good stuff. Mainly just produce a lot of traditional archery / bow hunting content for YouTube. And
you do a lot of stuff with our friends over at Three Rivers, don't you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, those guys have been helping support my videos for quite some time.
I think just about everybody here is friends with the guys over at Three Rivers, and that just speaks to them as a company. Those guys are absolutely fantastic. So go check out Three Rivers Archery. Aron, how are you, man?
I'm good. I'm in Wheat Ridge, Colorado, at the Cafaro World headquarters, hiding out in my podcast room. So I appreciate you guys work.
That's the best place to be, man. Tucked away where nobody can find you.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like a mushroom in the closet. That's kidding.
And then we've got Mr. Eichler himself. Fred, where are you at, man?
I'm in southern Colorado, and we're just got over mountain lion season, tapering off with the goose, and then looking forward to guiding turkey hunters here soon.
Now, you shot some geese this morning, did you not?
Yes, I did. Went out and had a good time, popped a couple geese. Well, the boys were checking calves, so we're starting to drop calves on the ground, so pretty much everyboom's working hard but me.
Now, did you shoot any of the geese with your recurve this morning?
No, I didn't take it. I should have, but I went with the boomstick this morning. Thought that would be a little easier.
So, here's what I want to do for the first portion. 2020, obviously a rough year for everybody. Did COVID screw up a lot of you guys' hunting plans? What was your highlight for the 2020 season? Highlight hunt, highlight of the year, whatever it may be. How'd your 2020 seasons go?
Who do you want to go first?
You can go first since you asked.
Keep us from walking all over each other. My 2020 went really well. It was very unique because of COVID. I lost 3 bear hunts. I didn't get to go on a moose hunt, 2 mule deer hunts, a Dall sheep hunt, moose and whitetail. I canceled because of COVID. I couldn't cross the border, but I supplemented that as fast as I could with a lot of hunts for whitetail in October, November timeframe in Oklahoma and Texas, as well as I guide Aoudad and mule deer hunters and filled that in as well. So it was a great season. I was able to, I was out quite a bit. I don't know. I shot several animals, lots of adventures. I can't really complain for what the kind of the big bowl of crap we've all got handed with COVID. I certainly am not gonna complain about it. It was a pretty amazing season.
That's awesome, man. Fred, how about you?
And I'm same. I can't complain. It was a great season. Had a lot of fun and got to hunt with family a bunch. Did a hunt in Kodiak in November, which was a lot of fun with the family. Just decoying in some Sitka black-tailed deer, and that was a good time. So yeah, I can't complain, man. Had a blast and put some animals in the freezer.
Clay?
Well, I didn't really have a 2020 season. That's the first elk, deer, everything. I missed everything this year. Was knee deep working on a big project I can't really talk about right now, but
I know what that is.
keep your mouth shut. But no, there'll be some info coming out later on this summer about what I was up to. But yeah, it was interesting.
Well, sounds like something we're going to have you back on to talk about again. Is what it sounds like to me.
Yeah, we could probably work something out.
It also sounds like a rough project if it kept you from hunting, though.
It was, yeah, you could call it rough.
Jim, how about you, man? I know you laid a few awesome whitetails down. How else did your season go?
It was a lot of hit and miss. And just thinking back, I think COVID probably increased my hunting opportunities. I was fortunate I didn't have any guided hunts up in Canada, no guided hunts planned for the year. So none of that got canceled. But what did get canceled is some of the shows and some of the meetings that I might have to go to. And since there wasn't so much going on, almost every time I went hunting, I was able to hunt longer and spend more time there. So yeah, I had a great time. I was able to hunt oryx in New Mexico twice, Sitka blacktail, mule deer, elk, whitetail deer a couple of times, and then hunted with my daughter a little bit. She had a rifle hunt, and then just got back from Sonora on a coos deer hunt. So pretty average, pretty good year for me.
Now your Kansas whitetail hunt kind of unfolded into being a pretty long hunt, but you ended up getting it done.
Yeah, actually, my Kansas hunt wasn't that long. I ended up killing my Kansas buck on November 6th, I think, which was about 2.5 weeks into the hunt. But then I also have property up in Nebraska about 100 miles away from our place in Kansas. So I was able to hunt Nebraska quite a bit. You can get two buck tags up there for archery hunt. And I shot one buck and never actually bought the second tag. I didn't want to get too greedy, but I ended up hunting whitetails for 6 weeks, which is a pretty good thing.
Now, for the rest of you, what would you say your highlight hunt for 2020 was? Go ahead, Aaron.
That's a tough one. I had a lot of kind of goals I had set early, and one of them an antelope spot and stock honestly shoot an antelope in general with the recurve. I've only been a few years, and I actually ended up hooking up with Danny Ferris with Ultimate Predator Gear decoy, and we first time out spot and stocked. I got 40 yards from an antelope, a really good antelope. So I would say that was definitely one of the highlights. And then I ended up doing in the Davis Mountains. I got to hunt a lot, so I'm trying to do the quick overview. In the Davis Mountains, I made a crazy stock on a 33.5 on one side, 34.5 on the other. Aoudad that was 13 years old, and in the Davis Mountains, it's crazy terrain and super aggressive, and I was able to shoot it at 10 yards on the stock. So those two were probably the coolest and two things that I was really focusing on. So I'd say those two were probably the top.
Nice, man. Now, Clay, did you? I know you said you had a rough season. Kind of touch and go. Did you have a big highlight hunt for 2020?
Yeah, I did all the normal hog hunting right after the first of the year, and when you said your highlight hunt, the one thing, and I think if I had a stellar elk season or something like this in the fall, I think this would still be my highlight. But I think it was February, March, something like that. I took my youngest boy, Finn, who was 7 at the time, down to South Florida to meet up with some other fellas to do some hog hunting down there. And I had shot a hog the day before, and so I was just this particular day I was just carrying my video camera, and we got into a little bunch of pigs, and I turned. So I always carry Finn just one single broadhead arrow, and I was carrying it with me. And so when we got into this little bunch of pigs, I gave him his arrow, and I turned my attention to the other fella that I was filming, and we went off and chased these pigs. Well, it wasn't 3-4 minutes later, Finn comes running back up and said, I shot one. And I looked at him and was like, really? Like, you shot a pig? And he said, yeah, I shot one. I said, all right. Well, he was kind of trailing behind another fella, and I went over and asked him, I was like, did he really shoot a pig? He said, yeah. And it was, it was a fair-sized hog. And so we found the blood trail and start off after this thing, and about 100 yards later, there's a 90-pound hog laying there that he had killed with a 20-pound self bow and one arrow.
Awesome.
It was awesome. It was.
That's incredible.
It was unbelievable.
Fred, what about you?
Man, probably the hunts I did with the family. My dad, 74, he was a Green Beret when he was younger, and he still guides elk hunters with me. And me, him, and the boys went out and got to do some hunting together. So those were the real special ones for me. But then, one funny one was, I shot a cow elk, which is my normal. I mean, I'm pretty much first up, first down. And my cameraman that was sitting in the blind with me, or actually we were in a ladder stand, but these elk are kind of working our way. I said, the lead cow. And he goes, you see the bull right behind her, right? I said, yep. The one that steps in range, I'm going to shoot. And she came by, and that was a pretty cool one for me. A lot of meat in the freezer, and we got a big laugh out of that because I shoot her and he starts bugling and running around. So, just probably the ones with the, with the family. I'm sure like all these guys, and I love hearing about the family hunts and the kids going out. But, I think COVID allowed a lot of people to, spend more time at home and with family. And so for me, that was the really fun part was, hunting with Dad and hunting with the boys and Michelle and, just getting to hang out, do more hunts like that.
That is awesome. Yeah. And I love watching, your hunts unfold with your boys, and always a cool thing to see and a special thing to watch. So gentlemen, I want to work through kind of, your switch to shooting a recurve, and that process. I know that, I don't know that each of you had a defining moment of I'm going to shoot a recurve. But what did your journey look like into shooting a recurve? And, maybe you started with a recurve and that's just all or maybe you made a conscious switch from compound to recurve. But, what does that journey look like for each of you? And what struggles did you face along the way? And I'll start with Clay this time.
All right. Well, I guess I'd always been attracted to traditional archery. And actually when I was a kid, I was probably, 9 or 10 or 11, my brother gave me a little Ben Pearson recurve, and I shot that. But when I got old enough to deer hunt, I went and got a compound because, this was mid 90s. You didn't have all the information that you have available today. There was no YouTube and Google and all that stuff. And so the only thing I ever knew was what people did around me. And so when I started thinking about deer hunting, I didn't even know that you could kill a deer with a recurve. I didn't know anybody that did it. Everybody I knew, hunted with compounds. And so I went and got a compound and hunted with that for a couple of years and killed a few deer with it. But I still, always was kind of looking for something else. I was looking for my way back into traditional archery. And I eventually found a book that detailed how to build bows and arrows, how to build wood bows. I got that book when I was probably 18 or 19 and started building bows. And then just a year or so later, started hunting with those bows. And once I started hunting with the bows that I was making, I'd sold the compound, and I've been shooting traditional ever since, I think 99 was my first season hunting with a self bow. So that's kind of how I got into it.
Nice. Now, Aaron, what about you? Because I know for you were probably kind of the most, what's the word I want to use here? Public switch to a recurve. If that makes sense. So walk me through your process.
Do you want me to give the filtered version or the actual real live truth version?
Whichever one you prefer.
I want to hear the real one.
Fred wants to hear the real one, and you don't tell Fred Eichler no. So you give us the real one.
Aaron.
Okay, so anybody that's listened to this, that's followed along, I shot a compound for forever and actually made fun of the current me's right now shooting a stick. And I shot animals at extreme distances at times with the compound. I never looked at it like, I'm using technology to, it's a handicap, right? I'm using technology to make up for my hunting skills. I just went out and gripped it and ripped it. And well, I did a podcast at one point on ethical shooting distances and, mathematics, right? Arrow speed, how fast an arrow gets out of a 290 foot per second bow and 175 feet. Anyway, after that podcast got done, to my surprise, I had a lot of hate mail from traditional archers basically saying I sucked, learn to hunt, go pick up a stick bow, you'll never kill anything. I saved some of those that I should send you. Clay, you may have been a guy that sent one. No, I'm just kidding. You didn't send anything.
He did, but he used a different name.
Yeah. And actually, Clay and I had some arguments, which I would say I have admittedly eaten crow on a few different things that I'm sure I'll go over in this podcast, just my mindset, right? So I sold everything I owned compound. Like this is, I get tunnel vision, and we're not talking like I had one bow. I probably had 20 dozen arrows, bow presses, arrow saw. I kept the arrow saw, sights, releases, thousands and thousands.
Yeah.
Sold it all. And walked down to Rocky Mountain Specialty Gear and Tom, and I'm like, hey, man, I sent a text out, actually, and he was excited. And I'm like, I got this. Can't be that hard. And it's been interesting since then. So I picked up the bow, shot several different ones. I actually kind of followed Fred's footsteps at first and shot a Palmer made by a guy named Mike, and shot that for a while. And I guess the rest is history. I committed to it at a level that's psychotic, probably. I know that when I made that switch, it was one of those things where I was, truly like, I'm going to make this work one way or another just to prove a point. And then I ended up becoming extremely addicted to it. And now my badge of honor is shooting something under 10 feet rather than 10 yards. I'm addicted to getting close now. And it's been a crazy journey along the way, which now with social media, pretty much everybody, that follows me obviously knows what's gone on, but it's been a trip. It's been good.
Now that's what so what year was that?
2016.
2016. So I remember watching that kind of unfold, and I remember watching that process take place, and I was excited about it. And I've always kind of had a drawn to shooting a recurve, but never kind of had the gusto to do it, because it does take that, just like that mindset change of I'm going to do this, and I'm going to make it work. I might go out and sling arrows and miss the target 5 out of 10 times, but I'm going to get to the point where I can shoot this thing. And it takes that mindset, it takes that change. And so I remember watching that take place, and I remember thinking, like, one day I'll do it, but that's not today. And then finally I had full access to Jim Willems for an afternoon here at my house, and I just said, teach me how to shoot this thing. And that's been the goal ever since. And so before I ask the other two, was all of you guys' decision to shoot a recurve like all in, I'm not shooting a compound anymore, or do you guys still hunt with compounds every once in a while?
I shot a couple animals with one this year just to do some testing for some different companies. But 99% stick bow, and I really only pick up the compound if I need to for testing purposes. My choice is always grab the stick.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah, I haven't hunted with a compound since '99, I guess. That was pretty much full in.
Now, I think I know both Jim and Fred's answers, but you guys are pretty much strictly recurves, right?
Well, I know I shoot it all, man. If I can fling an atlatl or slingshot, I like it all. I would say traditional bow is, probably 85% of it. But yeah, I enjoy handgun, rifle, especially with the kids. I like introducing them to everything. So for me, it's everything.
Well, and Dylan, I think I've told you this story, but I'll go back to my beginnings. I started hunting, bow hunting in the late 70s, and the compound bow was truly king then. Most of the recurve shooters from the early days had switched because it was easier to shoot. And when I started, there just weren't hardly any recurve bows available. And nobody shot him. I knew one guy, one local guy, that Yvonne Johnson. He shot a recurve bow. So the first 3 or 4 years of my bow hunting career, I shot a compound, and my brother kind of got me into it. He's 3 years older than I am, and he started talking about switching to a recurve. And so one day we decided, well, shoot, let's just do it. And I was able to borrow a 68-pound bear grizzly from Yvonne Johnson, which was fine at the time because I was shooting about an 80-pound compound, and started shooting that, and then met Fred Asbell at, I think, the Kansas Bowhunters Association banquet, and he was selling custom bighorn bows. And so in order to buy a new custom-made bow, I had to sell my compound. So in 1983, I went cold turkey. Kind of like Aron's story. I had to sell my compound bow to buy the recurve I wanted. And then from 83 to 2008, I did not own a single compound bow. But then I started hunting Africa, and I decided I wanted to shoot a Cape buffalo and an elephant with a bow, and I couldn't even come close to a heavy enough recurve to even try it, and I'm not sure they'd even let you. So I bought a big old heavy African Hoyt bow back then, and I was able to hold off using it on all of my North American hunts until 2014. I had a neck injury, and I ended up shooting a brown bear with that compound bow. And but now I'm back to shooting the recurves, and that's all I hunt with.
Now that story of you shooting that bear is pretty incredible. That was the bear on the beach you're talking about, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Run through that story real quick for me.
Okay, so like I said, I'd hurt my neck working, which I don't do much of, but I actually was doing a little bit, and I couldn't shoot my recurve bow worth a darn. And my hunt was about a week and a half away, and I thought, well, I'll go see my chiropractor. He can usually fix me up, and I'll be good by the time the hunt gets there. And I was hunting a Fognac Island, and they have I think 3 10-day hunts in the fall, and I was the second hunt. And so there was going to be a guy hunting 10 days, and then I had the second 10 days. And long story short, the outfitter calls me up on the first day of the first hunt and says, the first guy killed his bear today. He's leaving tomorrow. How soon can you get here? And I was just in panic mode. For one, I was going to get there as soon as I could. But two, I just was shooting like crap. So I went and got the compound bow out and put together some broadhead arrows, and it was still working. Had to turn it way down, so I had to readjust the sights, and got it sighted in, threw everything in the bag, and I was in Alaska the next day going bear hunting, thinking that I still might be able to hunt with my recurve bow, but it just didn't work. I just couldn't do it. So the choice was shoot a compound bow or burn the hunt, and nobody's going to burn a $20,000 brown bear hunt. So going after these bears, and the great thing was I got there 8 days early. I had an 18-day hunt instead of a 10-day hunt. So I was feeling pretty good about my chances. And we're seeing a few bears. I passed up a 8.5 footer on I think the second day. And then we go 3 or 4 days without seeing a single boar anywhere. We can always find a sow and cub somewhere. And finally we spotted a big track on a beach, and we landed the boat and went and looked at that track. And yeah, that's a big track. Everybody agreed. And we snuck over the ridge and saw a big old bear's back about 80 yards down below us. So we went back and got all our stuff together and got the video guy ready and snuck back up there, and we're sneaking up on this big old bear, and 2 cubs pop up. It's like, oh man, that's a sow. And brown bear sows can be big. They can get up to 9 foot. So it's one of those things you got to be careful of. And to shorten the story a little bit, we realized that there was a dead whale on the beach just over the hill from where we were. So we got up on the hill and watched this dead whale all day long. And we saw 17 brown bears coming into that dead whale through the day, but none of them were a big boar. And the big boar's tracks were everywhere. So we decided, well, he has to be nocturnal. He's going to be coming in at night, and we're going to have to come in real early in the morning and hope he's still there. So that's what we did. We went back to camp, spent the night, got up real early, got in the next morning, and the wind had changed, so we had to go in a different direction. But the guide sent the helper up on the hill to glass down at the dead whale, and he gives us a thumbs up. So we have all our stuff together and sneaking up over the little rise down into the dead whale, and really cool setup. There was, the whale's on the beach, and the ocean swells washed trash and trees and logs and everything up on the beach above where the whale was. So you had all this cover to sneak in behind, and we got into what I guess was under 30 yards. My guide told me it was 23, and probably had to wait about 10 minutes for the bear to turn broadside, and I took the shot with this 70-pound compound bow, and I hit low. It was still a killing shot, but it was low and angling back a little bit, so it didn't kill him right away. And he didn't run off. He just kind of humps up and looks around, and eventually walks by us right, between us and the beach. He walks by at about 12 yards, and I get a second arrow in him. This one's just perfect, right behind the shoulder. And there's another big bear down on the beach, and because that other bear was on the beach, my bear didn't want to go that direction because he was sick, and I'm sure he was hurting pretty good. And so he walked towards us, and I'm busy knocking up another arrow, and he walks by at like 10 feet and then just keeps going. And I had the arrow knocked up, and I looked up and thought, okay, he's going down. And he actually stumbled a little bit like he was going down, and just that instant he turned and came right at us. And he was maybe 15 to 20 yards when he caught our wind, and then turned and came at us. And my guide, Luke, he yelled a couple of times trying to get him to stop, and he didn't stop. So Luke shot him with the 375 right in the back of the head at about 12 feet. So
now you were were you the president of the Pope and Young Club at that time?
Yes, I was. Yes.
And you couldn't enter that bear because it was finished off with a rifle.
Yeah, that's correct. It's not considered a bow kill.
And I remember talking with you about that and saying, don't you think there's some strings you can pull? But so Fred, I kind of missed you, and need to loop back on your start with a recurve and kind of what made you decide to go with the traditional bow.
Well, reading Fred Bear's field notes were a big inspiration. I grew up hunting with my dad from a little kid, and my dad wasn't a bow hunter. He was a rifle and muzzleloader hunter. I told him I wanted to bow hunt pretty bad, so he was like, okay, well, let's get you a bow. So started out with a compound and had a blast with that, and then got a job working at Bear Archery when I think I was 18, and working at Bear Archery under Frank Scott. And, there was a bunch of really cool guys there. Joe White, a bunch of the old guard. And Frank Scott actually gave me a custom Kodiak. And I was like, man, I might have to try that. And then took a job managing an archery shop up in Fort Collins, Colorado. And the owner of the shop, Jim Widmeyer, who was an amazing traditional, not only a shot, but amazing hunter. He was real good friends with Mike Palmer, as Aaron mentioned earlier. Those two guys really, were probably a lot of the catalysts in getting me going. My dad once I got my dad into bow hunting, he wanted a recurve, so he shot a recurve, and that's all he's ever played with. bow wise. But so yeah, those guys, Jim Whitmire and Mike Palmer and Frank Scott probably had the biggest influence on me trying it out. And I thought it'd be just fun to shoot something with it, and then go back to the compound. But for me, I was like, man, it's way easier to hunt with a traditional bow than it is a compound. So it gives me an advantage in the field. So I went to it not for more of a challenge, but because I thought it was more efficient in the field when it came to hunting situations. So that was kind of an eye opener to me, and I just stuck with it. Love it.
And you kind of blew my mind when you painted that picture of how it's easier to hunt with a recurve, because in my mind it's always been the opposite. Aron, being the guy who, other than myself, has been the most recent to switch, have you found it more effective to hunt with a recurve?
Yeah, in a lot of ways. I'd say this is probably one thing where Clay and I had probably talked earlier that I'd say I've probably eaten some crow on this. I would say I'm more lethal. Well, I wouldn't say, I know I'm more lethal inside of 40 with a stick bow than I am with a compound, because I can get the shot off quicker. And I feel super comfortable out to 40, really good at 30 and in, and modify the way that I hunted, because when you're not afraid to drop a 100-yard bomb kicking up animals, it's, you hunt differently, where, now 100 yards is a par 4. I had to modify things, but overall, see more game because I have to be a lot more patient. It may be tough at times. Obviously, I'm not saying shooting a stick is easier all the way around, but overall, I would pick a stick inside of 40, which I never thought I would say that in that first year. I just constantly, I kept telling myself the first big game animal I shot was a bear, and I wasn't as good of a shot as I am now. I just started, so I was between 40 and 60 yards from it for an hour. And I kept thinking, you would be so dead if I had my compound. And I had tell me that will go away. And I'm like, it ain't going away, but it did. I mean, eventually I just became a better, hunter and got close. But yeah, I'd say, 40 and in is, I would pick the stick. I mean, after 40, I would pick a compound, but I just shoot everything 40 and in now. So
I think what you just said is spot on, and that's why I asked you the question. Fred painted this picture of how it's easier. If me and you were standing at 27 yards, you had your recurve, I had my compound, you would have an arrow in that kill zone before I do. And, so many times that's the name of the game, is why if they would have paused for a matter of seconds, I could have shot. And when you hunt with a recurve, you're cutting down that time substantially that you need them to stop. And so, that was kind of my mind switch too, but also exactly like you just said, when I made the switch, I decided in my mind, I want to make myself a better hunter and not just try to be a better shot. Because just like you said, you go out with your compound, and all summer long, you're practicing at 80 to 100 to 120, and you're just focusing on being a good shot. But now you pick up the recurve, and it's like, all right, let's learn how to be a better hunter. And so that's what that's exactly my draw to it. Before we move on, and I don't know how many of you guys are Easton fans. I know a couple of you are, but just want to give a quick thank you to our friends over at Easton. They make some of the finest arrows. I recently just got some of the new Axis 4mm in, which is what I'm going to be shooting out of my recurve. They fly like darts. Fred, that's what you're shooting out of yours, isn't it?
Yes, sir. I just got some of those, and they're awesome. I like the nostalgia of wood. That's pretty awesome, and aluminums are neat, but it's hard to beat the penetration and the flight characteristics of a carbon. Especially a small diameter. I shoot lightweight, and that extra penetration helps me out a bunch.
Yeah, and those 4mm, I had four different arrows and shot them all, and those were just flying the best for me. And so go check out Easton Archery because they have an incredible lineup of arrows. Now, for all of you guys, what was that one defining moment, and maybe if you started with a recurve and that's all you've ever known, maybe you didn't have that defining moment, but what was that moment where you were like, making the switch was the right call. This is what I want to do. This is what it's all about.
Mine's kind of unique. So obviously these other gentlemen have been doing it a lot longer. Mine being more frequent was in 2016, I shot the stick all year. Had a very successful year. I put a bunch of animals on the ground, learned a bunch, but for multiple different reasons. In 17, I grabbed a compound, and I was in Alberta with a buddy of mine. We were both hunting together. He had a stick bow. I had my compound. I shot a great deer in Alberta opening day. Wasn't really excited about it like I mean, I'm always excited, but not at the level that I quickly realized I was with a recurve. Later that day, my buddy with the recurve, we went on a stalk when we both ended up tagging out the first day. His stalk was much more technical than mine. We got to about 8 yards, 12 yards. He had a longbow, made a great shot. I was at a multiplier of about 1,000 more excited about watching him and filming that than I was shooting my own deer. And so I had like this, what alcoholics would call a moment of clarity. I sat down and was like, what the hell am I doing? And sold all my shit again and got recurves. And obviously that's not going to change now, but that was my, okay, what are you doing, Snyder? Pick up a stick. That's what belongs in your hand kind of moment. And it took to grab that compound. Nothing against, like I said, I shoot a compound sometimes, but I mean, that true love and passion and everything else for the recurve really showed right there that, Aaron, you're a recurve shooter. Just stick with shooting a recurve.
That's a great point, man. That's the excitement level. I think that hit the nail on the head.
Does anybody else have that defining switch moment?
Yeah, this is Jim. I'm kind of the old guy in the group, and it's been so far back, it's kind of hard for me to remember some of this stuff. But I remember right when I was switching over, and primarily I was a whitetail guy. I was living in Kansas, and it's a lot easier to do it there because you have, whitetail hunters, they shoot at 20 yards. It's 15 to 22 max. And even today, our Pope and Young statistics shows that the average is just barely over 20 yards on a whitetail. So that's a little different than hunting out west. And I think my defining moment was I was visiting with an old guy I know, and I can say he's an old guy because he just had his 90th birthday. But this was, 40 years ago. And he had been one of my heroes growing up. And he had hunted the first 2 Kansas deer seasons in 65 and 66 before he moved to New Mexico. And he'd hunted with an old Red Wing hunter, and he'd killed 2 great bucks. I think both of them off the ground back in the first 2 deer seasons. And I was talking to him about it. And I was like, well, with the compounds nowadays, you can shoot farther. And he said, oh, I don't know about that. He said, I could hit a pipe plate at 40 yards all the time back in those days. And I was like, man, I can't do that. I can do that at 20, but 40, that's just too much. And then I got to thinking about it. Well, shoot, if he can do it, I can do it. And that was what really convinced me that I wasn't ever going to go back. I was going to learn how to shoot that well out to 40 yards. And yeah, that's what I did. I never really looked back.
Clay, I know you kind of defined that moment yourself when you talked about making the switch. But was there one specific time or moment where you're like, yeah, this is it?
No, not really. I mean, for me, I think it was just always there. I just didn't have the guidance I needed to, go down the path that I would eventually go down. And once I found that instruction, it was just like, that's where I was always supposed to be. I just didn't know it.
And let me just say this, while you're on the topic of finding that guidance, that was my issue. I'm like, I've got guys around me that have shot compounds their whole life. And they when I got that start, they were there to help me. They were there to guide me and teach me. I didn't have that for a recurve. And so that's what kept me back. And that's what made me, kind of pump the brakes on ever starting. And so that was the purpose for this series that we're concluding is the trad series. That was the purpose for this, is hopefully, somebody who has faced that barrier of, well, I want to start, but I don't know where. I don't even know how to pick a bow. I don't know how to pick arrows. I don't know how to shoot. I don't know. That was the purpose in wanting to do this series. And so what I tried to do was just get as many guys as I could with as much knowledge as I can. So to teach and walk you through the process of beginning traditional archery. And so, guys like Jim and Aaron and Fred and Chris Perino, Harv Ebers, walking you through all of these different aspects of shooting a recurve. That was the purpose in building this. So if you've ever thought to yourself, I want to shoot a recurve, but I don't know how, I don't know where to get my start, go back and listen to these 6 episodes, and I promise you, Fred shares some incredible tips on setting up your bow. Aaron shares some incredible tips on arrow selection and how to set up your arrow. Jim talks about choosing a bow, and Harv Ebers talks about shot execution. And so just so much knowledge in this series that we just did. So go back and listen to those. But also, I did want to mention that Clay puts out some incredible informational stuff on aiming and shot execution and back tension. And Clay, I've personally digested hours of your stuff as I made this switch. And so keep doing what you're doing, man. Keep it up, because, I believe a lot of guys need that, and I needed it. And so keep doing what you're doing, but also, guys, go check out Clay because he puts out some awesome content. Fred, did you have that defining moment for yourself?
Man, Aaron probably hit the nail on the head for me. It was just that excitement level. It's
you get excited, Fred?
It's embarrassing. It's embarrassing. I still haven't figured out how to. I finally figured out how to stay calm before the shot. I just haven't figured out how to stay calm after it yet. But
dang, I have that same problem.
Dude, I know, right? It took me a while to get calm before it, but afterwards is when it all bubbles out. But yeah, Aaron, when he said that, the excitement level, and that's the thing. And I enjoy shooting it all. And like I said, I guide guys like a lot of these guys on here, guide hunters and take other people out. And, taking my boys out, I want to introduce them to everything out there that's legal, every method of hunting. And for me personally, there's no comparison to a rifle or a handgun or any of the other stuff. To me, when I shoot something with a recurve, it's all fun, but man, that traditional bow, it just makes everything a trophy. It makes it awesome. It just feels cooler, and so yeah, it would just be that same excitement level. And wow, what really gets me excited, and that would be don't tell my wife, but probably the most exciting is the traditional bow.
No, that is I love Fred because of his excitement. That's what makes him interesting and makes him fun to watch. But you're absolutely correct, man. I remember shooting my first deer ever with a rifle at 250 yards down in southern Arkansas. The thing weighed 70 pounds. But I remember being excited. I was a kid. It was my first deer. I was excited. But then I remember being a teenager and harvesting my first deer with a compound, and the excitement level was times 10. And then my first animal with a recurve was a hog, and the excitement level was times 10 past the compound. And it just seems as though the closer you are to that animal, just like Aaron talked about, wanting to shoot him inside 10 yards, the closer you are to that animal, the more intimate it is, the more exciting it is, the more, just overwhelmed you get with just that pure joy of the harvest.
You also get more exercise because you're probably going to blow more out. So you have to go back to your glassing point to redo, which is good if you. So it's a win-win for me.
I get more exercise just shooting at home because I miss the target more. So I got to A, chase arrows, but B, walk around looking for them in the grass. So I get more exercise even just shooting at home.
Yeah. Well, one of the first hunts, and Clay, I don't know if you remember this, I shot the first year, my second big game animal, I stalked into a mule deer to I don't know, Frank's here. Frank flagged me in 4 or 5 feet. My arrow was between its horns when I drew back. And I remember the moment the arrow hit that deer thinking that shit would have never happened with my compound because I didn't get that close, and it was one of those things where I get typewriter legs sometimes in a tree stand, but trying to keep my composure, I had a decent crosswind every now and then that let me get closer. And I got to 9 yards, threw a couple rocks. I could see the top of his antler tips. He wasn't moving. And I thought, well, I guess I'll just climb on top of that rock and shoot him. And, when it happened, I was like, okay, this is a new feeling for me. Cause, literally like the arrow, the broadhead was between its antlers, the top of them when I drew. And that was a pretty I'm like, wow, that is not going to ever happen to me. It could, I guess. I'm just not going to let it happen with a compound where, with the stick, I've got to be more patient. And, I've learned a ton, and I'm still new at this. I've learned a ton. And like I said, some of the things Clay said in the beginning, I'm like, whatever, dude. And now I'm like, I'm eating a little crow, whatever. Maybe Clay was right. But it's been awesome the whole way. I don't regret, anything. And that close, being that close, even if you blow one out, watching a guy stalk and get 13, 14 yards with a stick bow is more exciting for me than watching a guy, drop a bomb at 100 yards with a compound, because getting within 13, whether you, or 10 or whatever, whether you harvest that animal, kill that animal or not, it's a victory. I mean, you got into its living room, and that's something to be said for that. And it's becoming kind of a lost art, which is one of the things I know we all, and I'm trying to focus on to others to get them to switch from a compound, is you are missing a big part of hunting if you're taking those longer shots.
Yeah, you are. You absolutely are. And I had a guy tell me, and it might have been Jim. I don't remember if it was you, Jim. You can speak up. But I had a guy tell me, you can never use the saying, if I only had my compound. Because you don't have your compound. It's a different hunt. It's a different situation. You don't have it. So don't look at, well, if I had this, then I would have been able to harvest that animal. Because that's going to make you bitter towards your recurve.
Well, I think if you have that thought, you should probably have your compound. I mean, you should probably be hunting with it, because, I mean, if you have that thought, you're focusing on the kill, right? You're not focusing on what Aaron was just talking about. Like, man, you might not have got a shot at that animal, but man, I was just 10 feet from that animal. Like, that never would have happened had you had your compound. I feel like you might not put as many antlers on the wall or as much meat in the freezer with a recurve, but when you do that, like, the reward that you get from that is so much greater, but the cost is blown stalks, and you just got to get to a point eventually. And I think this is what Aaron was talking about that we had talked to before. Eventually you get to the point where you're just happy to have been that close. You're just happy to have had that experience. And I mean, that's the way,
right.
That's the way I've looked at it for decades.
I'd probably argue with you on that play. I've proven you can be as successful with a stick. Now, I'm not saying your stick, Clay, because I am not diving into that world, because I'm not going to be rubbing any funk on the tree outside and making my own bow. But with a recurve, I think if you put the time and discipline in it, and I get to hunt a lot. So, I mean, but most hunts I go on, I'm successful at about the same amount of time with my stick as I was with my compound. So I'm not saying that to argue for argument's sake, but what people listening in, if you put in the effort and in the field craft animal behavior, I would not look at the recurve in any way as a detriment. I think you can be as successful, if not more, because if you're more patient, chances are you're going to learn more about animal behavior. The more you learn about that, the more successful you'll be. Now, that is not with a self-made bow. I am not ever going to probably try that, but with my bow that I have, because I just don't know that much about self bows.
Yeah, I'm not talking so much about self bows, but just traditional in general. And I'm not saying that you can't be as successful with a traditional bow. And like you said, if you put in the time, absolutely. I think what I was mainly talking about is on an efficiency basis. Like, if you have one day to hunt, you're probably more likely to kill an animal if you have a compound than if you have a traditional bow. I mean, that's just facts. That's just the way it is, because it's a lot easier to get within 70 yards of that animal than it is to get within 30 yards. That's the point that I was trying to make.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I don't know. It's difficult because I'm not disagreeing with you at all. I think people with a compound, if they went to a stick, would learn animal behavior a lot better, which would allow them to get closer, which may even up. That's what happened to me. Is I was like, okay, maybe I do suck somewhat as a hunter, and then figured out to close that distance from 70 to 35. And so I guess not blueprinting all of it, but I think once you pick that stick up, you have to evolve as a hunter, And part of that evolution is learning animal behavior, becoming more patient. So it may not be apples to apples. And yeah, you're right, you can drop a bomb at 70, but I think you'll become a better hunter overall and be close to as successful because you're becoming a better hunter while you have that recurve, or that, you're limiting that technology in your hand. You're learning more about the outdoors.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. It's, when you choose to limit yourself and limit your distances and things like that, it gives you the opportunity to learn from those animals, because you're not able to make those 70-yard shots. And so when you were talking about, I don't remember what animal it was, being within 40 or 50 yards for an hour. I mean, heck, you're spending an hour learning, watching that animal's behavior, seeing what it does, how it responds to its environment, and all of those things you can use later on in when you're out hunting another animal, all those lessons that you've learned.
Yeah. I learned a lot in the last years, or 5. A lot of screw ups. Where were you guys helping me, Daniel?
Say that again.
Oh, I said I learned a lot in the last 4 or 5 years, and I like it. I said some humble pie, and obviously, there's not a lot of there is a lot more now, but in 16 there wasn't as many avenues to go through. There was pretty much there was Fred and Clay. I mean, that was there. I was lucky. I had the clums by me. Now there's a lot more resources, but the big point I try to get across to people is you might be a little bit more successful with a compound, but you're going to be a hell of a better woodsman with a stick bow. And if you put the effort in, you will put animals on the ground. You will be successful if you don't hit the easy button and stick with it.
Absolutely.
Now, you talked about those lessons learned. Gentlemen, what's the biggest, and maybe you have a story to go with it, but what's that big lesson that you've learned over the years when it comes to recurve?
Learned that you can miss a couple times and the animals don't hear it, and I kill it on the third arrow. That never happens with a compound. That probably isn't what you're talking about, but Tom Klum told me that would happen, and that happened on my first big game animal. I missed at 20 because I had crap running down both legs. My right leg was shaking. He didn't hear the bow. A better position, and then I shot him. So that really isn't what you're talking about. But I'd say the biggest thing I've learned is if you're patient and you have good woodsmanship, you will be successful. You will be able to get close. A few different animals that gave me troubles, really just persistence and staying after it, paid off, which was a lot more. I had a lot better sense of accomplishment with the recurve making that happen by far than I did with the compound.
Yeah, and I'll agree with that as well. And one of the things I learned early on was I was such a bad shot. I had to learn how to be a really good hunter because I'd have to have multiple chances. And, I used to tell people, well, I'm about 50% on my shooting. And thinking back, there was times when I wasn't even close to that. But the good thing was I was persistent, and I'd kick the dirt and cuss and spit, go get my arrow and sharpen it and go back the next day and do it all over again. And you just have to have the mindset of, then I'm going to kill the next one. And eventually it worked.
Yeah, having a short-term memory, I believe, is very important. You need to forget what happened. And thank God I was born with that, because guys are like, oh, I can't believe you missed. I missed the 200-inch mule deer in the high country. And I'm like, well, let's not talk about that. I don't want to. Yeah, we're moving on from that. That's old. Like, my last affects my next one. And I've been able to get a good handle on that.
Yeah, I tend to repress the memory of the misses too.
Fred,
I sometimes totally forget.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever missed.
Fred, what's a big lesson you've learned over the years?
Man, just that you've got to tune your stuff. I mean, those guys' points are all super valid. That short-term memory is great, and being an optimist, which I think all bow hunters are, and also just the fact that a lot of guys do themselves a disservice by being either overbowed or not realizing that recurves, longbows, and all that stuff, they need to be tuned up just like anything else. And I've seen some guys that probably would have been amazing shots and put a lot more animals on the ground, but they had done themselves a disservice by not having properly tune their equipment. And it's, it cost me some animals early on, even though I had some great mentors. Once I started trying to, tune my own traditional equipment and switching arrows or, switching strings even, or different bows, the fact that, it took me a while to learn how to properly tune one and get that bear shaft flying like a dart. That was some of those were tough lessons, because some animals walked away that wouldn't have if I would have had, equipment that was shooting well. But that goes back to that optimism and short-term memory, like these guys just said.
And again, if you jump back a few episodes, you run me through how to tune a bow. And I learned so much in that episode. I learned so much on how to tune my bow, and again, if it wasn't in the negative degrees here, I would have went out and done exactly what we talked about already. But it's been too cold for me to do that. So, but no, I learned a ton from that episode, and I believe everybody can learn something from that on how to tune a bow. Clay, what do you got for me?
Well, I was sitting here trying to think. But I think really the biggest is just the love of the hunt, you got to have that. And Aaron had talked about persistence. That's something you've got to have. But I think to have that, you've first got to have a love of the hunt, just to stick with it and put in all of that effort that it's going to take to be successful with those weapons.
I like it. No, and that's Chris Perino is one of my favorite guys on planet Earth, because anytime you ask him a question, you're like, well, anytime you try to ask him a technical question, he's like, I don't know. I just I shoot what works for me. That's all I do. And he's like, I just like to hunt, like to kill stuff, and that's all that matters. And I'm like, okay, very good. And but that's just the simplicity he keeps it to, and that's why I believe he's so successful, is because he doesn't overcomplicate everything. He just loves to hunt. He found out what works for him, and that's just what he does.
I just spent a week with him. He was helping us guide Outad hunters in the Davis Mountains. And I've known Chris for a long time. That dude is a trip, because he is exactly like what you say. I went on a full-on dissertation on tuning, arrow spine, FOC, brace, everything, knock tuning. And they're like, Chris, what do you think? He's like, I just kill stuff.
Yeah.
And there was that simple. He's like, it's pointy at the end, and I get closer. And I was like, yeah, that's another way to do it for sure. That is definitely a way to do it.
Yeah. No, I remember calling him, and I'm like, hey man, I need to order some new arrows from Easton. What would you recommend? He's like, I just find an arrow that shoots and I shoot it. And I'm like, okay, thanks man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, he's a trip.
No, he's a fun guy.
Some people can do that and get away with it, but going back to what Fred says, just figuring out how to tune your bow and what you need to look for, and going through all of that steps, that just gets you that much closer to the bow, and it makes you that much better. Even if you don't recognize that you're a better shot, you understand what you and the bow are doing and what it's capable of, and then when it's time for the shot, you just have so much more confidence, and that's what it really comes down to. You have to shoot at animals and kill some animals and figure out what it feels like to be successful. And then as soon as you get that confidence and you're thinking, this animal's not going to get away. I think that's what causes a lot of buck fever, is people are afraid it's going to get away or you're going to screw up. And my thought was I was always afraid it was going to get away. But once you can get past that and realize that I'm going to kill this animal, it's just so much easier to make the shot.
No, you're absolutely correct. And all great tips. And again, I'm just this episode and this series is just so chocked full of knowledge and little tips and tricks. And I know Aaron's kind of passion for having that arrow and tuning that arrow and putting so much thought into his arrows. And so that's why I had him do the arrow building episode and arrow setup episode. And so again, if you want to hear that, jump back a couple episodes and hear Aaron talk about how to find that arrow that's going to work for you. Fred, I want you to share that story. So in the last podcast you were on, you shared the story of that fox that almost bit your face off. But you also mentioned the story, and I got to see that footage. Alex showed it to me on our recent hunt down in South Texas about that mule deer that you shot. That was a really cool hunt with that mag riser. Tell me about that hunt.
Now, do you mean the Sitka blacktail on Kodiak? with the decoy or which?
Yes, I'm sorry. That's the one.
No,
Yes,
no problem.
you're sitting behind the decoy. Yeah.
Yeah. It was just just an awesome hunt for me. I mean, like a lot of guys, I grew up reading Fred Bear's Field Notes, so he was a huge inspiration as far as, talk about a guy that just had a great way of telling a story. A super good guy, had time for everybody, would talk to anybody, super passionate guy, and arguably, had the biggest impact on our industry, as much as anyone. So Fred was always one of those guys that to me, I was like, wow. And I remember reading stories when I was a kid about, the Valiant Maid, the boat he was on, and, Kodiak Island. And, I got to see that footage on TV when I was a kid of him shooting that monster brown bear, that came around the rock. And I just thought, holy chowder. So for me, just being on Kodiak was fun because it makes me think of Fred Bear and, and how many people he's influenced. But yeah, it was fun. I mean, I wasn't after brown bear. I just, I was after sitka blacktail, and I was with the family. And, as a couple guys alluded to, it's about getting close and having fun. And, I had Montana decoy with me and showed it to a sitka blacktail, and he came up to about 5 yards, which is right in my wheelhouse. I got a 50-50 chance of hitting them if they're right there. And he came around and gave me a great shot. And man, it was just one of those deals. It was just, it was just inspiring. It was really neat. And, walking around wondering if Fred Bear had stood right where I was standing, or, had been in the area I was at. It was really a neat, that whole thing was just neat to me, because he really did, besides my father and, guys like Mike Palmer and Jim Widmeyer, Frank Scott, Fred Bear, without even knowing it, had a huge influence on me wanting to be a bow hunter.
Now, Aaron, you kind of have a story, kind of the same. I never heard the story, but I seen you post about that antelope that you shot with that pop-up decoy. Tell me about that hunt. That was your first antelope with a recurve, am I correct?
It was. I had tried a little bit before, and again, I'm kind of goal oriented. I set those ahead of time, and so I was actually sitting. Fred, you're pretty good friends with Danny. He's quite a comedian.
He's a great guy.
Yeah. So I'm sitting in a ground blind, and he's texting, "Where you at?" And I said, "Oh, I'm on that property. Got permission." And he's like, "Why aren't you here?" And I'm like, "Well, because there's antelope around me, and it's 114, and I'm not overly happy in this blind." And he goes, "Well, I hope you suck and you miss. Get over here." And I'm like, so after like 6 hours of him texting me and sending like bad voodoo, I'm like, all right, dude. So I got out of the blind, drove down to Danny's. We hung out the next morning. We actually tried a little bit decoying the next morning. And then that afternoon, he's like, dude, let's get the decoy out and we'll hide behind the horses. And I'm like, what? And he's like, yeah, it works. It's awesome. And anyway, so I was like, whatever. I'm up. So I strapped a cow decoy to my bow, and we got one of his buddies that's kind of leading the horse. Danny is not exactly a set of car keys in his older age. So we got 3 fat dudes behind 2 horses, and horses aren't normally, used to humans walking beside them. And so they weren't real keen on that. And I'm like shouldering this horse, trying to get it to move. And we're at 150, 200 yards. We're at 100. We're at 80. And I'm like, okay, this might work. Like the antelope hasn't even picked his head up. And so the idea was we would get at a distance close enough where I could shoot, and then I would kind of pop out and I'd have that cow decoy. So I'm literally like body slamming this horse, trying to get it to go in the right direction. And I shot twice. The first shot, he was trying to film underneath the horse, and it was a male horse. And so there was something in the camera in the way as he's dropping below the horse's legs, trying to film the first shot. So the second shot, we got a little bit closer because the antelope had no idea. When it looked up, when I took the first shot, it just saw a decoy and went back to feeding. And so we got a little bit closer, and I could hear Danny say, move, trying to get the horses closer. And so we got to 39 yards and no wind. I was comfortable, and I popped out. Antelope kind of looked up, put his head back down, and you pinwheeled it. It ran about 45 yards, rolled up, and it's an unbelievable antelope. it's not Boone and Crockett, but it's into Pope and Young. And I dropped my bow, and, the footage when we send it out will be funny, because I literally, very rarely do I get, I'm not overly excited after an animal. I'm more gracious, and nothing wrong with any of that. I'm just usually quiet. And I kind of put my hands on my head. I was like, I can't believe that panned out. I mean, I've spent hours in a blind, low crawled hundreds, thousands of yards trying to get one of these, and it all boiled down three dudes hiding behind a horse and popping out behind a decoy. And Danny was I was like, dude, I cannot believe that happened. And it's just one of those moments you're not ever going to forget. And again, I've had some crazy experiences in the last few years. I shot a wolverine in the Chugach Mountains at like 14 yards, and I shot a mountain goat. My wife they got all the film and footage here in Colorado with the stick. And all of those hunts really boil down to, when you look at it as far as the weapon goes, the majority of the story of how exciting it is because of how close I got, where there would have been a story, but it wouldn't have been as crazy of a story if I had a compound, because I'm just not getting as close. And I always keep that in mind if I ever get down a little bit, that, what I get out of the hunt is a lot more than it was before.
Now, is there anywhere to watch that hunt?
There, it will be. I got to get Danny and kick him in the ding and get him to but yeah, it'll be up soon on his website.
Yeah, man. Well, shoot me a link, and as soon as that goes live, I'd love to watch that. Before we move on, Jim Willems, you've got a minute and a half to give us an ad or a plug for Pope and Young.
Oh man, that's going to be tough. A minute and a half. I'm not prepared. Okay, here we go. So, I've been involved with the Pope and Young Club since I think 1987. My brother got me involved more than anything. He wanted to become an official measure, and we went to the convention in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and it was such a fun event that I joined, and he became a measure, and then we were both determined to stick with it long enough to get really involved with the club, and then I became a measure and got involved with the club. But the Pope and Young Club, along with all of the state and local organizations from way back when, are the sole reason why we have archery seasons all over the country, separate archery seasons. We have preferred dates. We have long seasons. Everything we have today goes back to the beginnings of the Pope and Young Club and working with the state organizations and state wildlife agencies. And now here we are, fast forward, we're coming up on our 60th year. We've won a whole lot of those battles, and everybody seems to take for granted that, we haven't, and we're not going to lose it. But the problem is, if you don't fight for it, you will lose it. We have all over the country, we have rifle hunters want to hunt earlier, want to hunt in the rut. The muzzleloader hunters think they need to get into our seasons. And, we have to be selfish about it. We fought hard to get the preferred times because we hunt harder, and it's harder for us to be successful. So we're still fighting those battles, and people need to understand that, these battles never go away. It seems like they do, and it seems like it's just taking care of itself, but it never does. All bow hunters need to be involved in one way or another, whether it's the state organization or the Pope and Young Club. You need to get involved and support one of these organizations, because we need your help to keep fighting these battles, to make sure that we still have long and ideal timed seasons. And that's what the Pope and Young Club is here for.
Absolutely. The Pope and Young Club is the voice of bow hunters all across America. So if you're not a member of Pope and Young, I would highly encourage you to go check them out. They've been a good friend of the show for a long time. And Jim Willems was kind of my introduction to the Pope and Young Club. And I've kind of fallen in love with what they do and what they stand for. So go check out the Pope and Young Club. Clay, how old are your boys?
My oldest boy will be 12 this fall, so he'll be old enough to hunt big game in Idaho. So we're pretty excited about that.
Oh, I bet.
Oh yeah, we've already got some plans in Idaho. If my wife or I draw a tag, we can transfer it to him, and so I don't hardly ever put in for tags because the general over-the-counter opportunities are so liberal. But I'm going to start putting in for him now, and we've got our eye on some pretty pretty good hunts that we could transfer to him if we happen to draw them. And then my younger boy will be 9.
Now, do you think, and this kind of goes, I've kind of talked to Fred about this a little bit, but with you being such a traditional guy, do you think your boys will ever venture off into compounds and crossbows, or you think they'll kind of just follow in Dad's footsteps and hunt with a recurve their whole life?
I don't know. That remains to be seen. If they want to pick up a compound, that's fine with me. I don't care. Just as long as we're out in the woods having fun together.
Yeah. Now, what was their? Have both of them harvested an animal with a recurve before?
My oldest boy hasn't yet. We're working on that. We're trying to get him on a hog this spring. My younger boy killed that pig last year, but he's Finn, the younger one, he's the one that really has the drive. Coy,
Right.
my older boy, he's more into fishing, but he's taken more of an interest in hunting this year. I think probably because he's going to be able to do some hunting out west this year. But it's fun having them out there. You definitely give up some opportunities to put meat in the freezer, but having them along and being able to show them and teach them different things is a lot of fun.
Yeah, man, I've got a 2-year-old boy, and he's all about bows, and he's all about hunting, guns, and I think part of the problem was the first animal I shot, in which he was really old enough to understand. He was old enough to see the footage and say, "Man, that was my dad," was a bear, and so he's all about bear hunting. And he doesn't understand. We live in Kansas. You're not going to see bears here, but he's all about it, man. Which makes me super happy as a dad, and so I cannot wait to get him old enough to get a bow and get him out there and start shooting and hunting with me. I just can't wait. But Clay, what's that one story, man, that you have that really just resonates and will hopefully inspire somebody to give it a shot with shooting a recurve?
Won't you go with somebody else? Let me think about that for just a sec.
Jim, you got one for us?
Yes, I do. Great timing. I was just thinking about this, and this wasn't that long ago. In 2018, I drew a random tag on one of the really good Arizona elk units. I didn't have enough points to draw, just put in for it, and me and a buddy drew the tag. And here's what's great about hunting with a recurve as opposed to maybe a compound where you can shoot a little farther. I had another hunt going on, so I didn't get a start right off, but I got there on about the third day of the hunt and hunted the first evening, had a couple of encounters. And the next morning I got into a herd, right at first light. I could hear them bugling. And just as the sun's coming up, I have this big old 335, 340 bull in front of me in a burn. And since it's such a great unit to have, I had decided I wasn't going to shoot anything smaller than 340. I needed to hold out and try to get the biggest bull out there. And here we go. First morning, here's this bull. He's close enough. He's right there. Big old black antlers from being there in the burn and heavy horned. And I had him at 40 yards for, 15 or 20 minutes. And I even come to full draw twice on him because 40 is my max, but I'll take it if it's just right. But it wasn't just right. It wasn't just the perfect shot. And I didn't get that bull. He wandered over the hill, and I never spooked him, but I couldn't keep up with him and never got it. And that's the instance where if I'd have been shooting a compound with sights and a release, that 40-yard shot would have been a piece of cake. I'd have just put the pin on it and leveled it out and shot. And I'd have been done the second day, the first full morning I had to hunt. But because I wasn't done, I had encounter after encounter with herd bull after herd bull. And on about the third day, I thought, I need to keep track of how many herd bulls I'm getting close to. And I decided I'm going to count anything I got to under 50 yards. I'm going to count that as a close encounter. And by day 10, I had been within 50 yards of over 50 herd bulls during this hunt, which is just unbelievable. I can't imagine being able to experience that. And then, I got down to the last couple of days and I thought, you know what, Jim, it's kind of getting to the end here. And, you really like to eat elk, and, maybe that 340 isn't really doable. And I finally decided, you know what, the next 6-point herd bull I come up on, if he's not just, tore up and busted up, I'm going to shoot him. And then that morning I got an 18-yard shot at a nice 6-point that was a little over 300 inches. And watched him fall over 20 yards away, and it's like, holy smoke, this was fun. But I could have ended that hunt that first morning, and I never would have got to experience those other 49 encounters, which was just incredible.
I really thought you were gonna go with the buffalo, man.
Well, I could do that next.
That was an awesome hunt, and we'll loop back to that here in a minute. Clay, did you think of one?
Yeah, I thought of one. But that was a great story. And that's, Jim, what Jim was talking about. That's a lot of what I was talking about earlier. I mean, you have so many opportunities just to be out there hunting, and experience those things. But I think the one of the most memorable experiences I've ever had when bow hunting, and this was when I first moved out west. I lived in southeast Idaho, not far from Idaho Falls, and there can be some great elk hunting around there. But I was fresh into Western hunting. I didn't know anything. I mean, I was hunting in cotton clothes, had cheap boots. I mean, just didn't know anything about the West, didn't know how to read thermals or anything. I mean, I came from Florida. And so, it took me a number of years to kill an elk. And it was after I left Southern Idaho before I killed one. But I had so many encounters down there that if I knew what I knew, if I knew then what I know now about elk hunting, I could have killed an elk every year. But this one particular day, I was hunting in an area, and I was up on top of a ridge and saw a herd of elk probably, I don't know, a mile away, and this was getting towards dark. And so the next morning, got up super early, got up to that ridge, dropped over the other side, and got down on the edge of this meadow where I had seen them the evening before. I figured they'd be out there feeding all night long. And turns out I got in just behind them. I found where they came out the meadow, went through a wallow, and just started up the hill. And I was, the thermals were still coming down at that time, so I could smell them. I mean, there was still fresh mud on the vegetation, and I tracked them up this hill and got about, I don't know, it was about 11 o'clock or so, still hadn't seen them. And so I took off my pack, pulled out my lunch. I was just about to take a bite of my sandwich, and this bull bugled from right across the knoll, and he wasn't 60, 70 yards away. And so I took my boots off and slipped up over this knoll, and there was this, I don't know what he would have measured. He was 300 or more, and probably a dozen cows, and he was rutting hard, chasing those cows around, bugling, making all kinds of noises that I'd never heard before. And but I didn't have enough cover. I didn't have enough cover to get over there to him, and at that time, I didn't know anything about calling. I mean, I was hunting them like I was still hunting, just like I'd hunt whitetails from the ground. And so I was sitting on this little knoll trying to figure out what to do when a cow broke out of the herd. She came right up the hill, and when she got up the hill, she turned and walked right to me. And it was she was making a beeline to me, and she stopped about 8 feet from me. And I was kneeling down on the ground, and she was standing there over the top of me, looking down at me. And for some reason, she wheeled and ran off, but she didn't spook. She didn't bark. She didn't know what I was. She didn't smell me. Well, when she did that, that bull saw that she was up there and away from the herd. So he comes running up the hill, bugling and pissing all over himself. And he stops about 8 yards from me, just on the other side of this big old gnarly dead fir tree, and lets out this bugle that shook the ground. And I did not get a shot at that bull. He stopped right there, turned around, and walked directly away from me so that I never had a clear shot at him. But just being there in that situation, being that close to those elk, hearing those sounds that I'd never heard before, I mean, that's a day that I'll remember for the rest of my life, even though, and I think it'll always go down as one of the best hunts I've ever been on, even though I didn't get a shot at that animal. I mean, it was amazing. And
that right there sums it all up, man. Being starting out as a compound hunter, these non-hunters or rifle hunters didn't understand. Wait, you had a deer at 40 yards and you couldn't shoot it? Well, I mean, and now switching to a recurve, you tell these stories and you're talking to compound guys and they're like, wait, you had a deer within 30 yards? You had a deer within 20 yards and you couldn't shoot it? And you're like, well, no, I couldn't. I didn't get a shot. And but that's what it's absolutely all about is those experiences, and you've touched on it several times this podcast, and that's what it's all about, and that's what it should be all about. To wrap this up, what would be the one piece of advice, just the one tip you would give somebody who's getting their start in shooting a trad bow?
I'll start with that. I think the most important thing you need to do to begin with is learn how it feels. And you need to decide where you want to anchor, and you need to pull back and draw an anchor and hit that spot over and over again until it just feels normal. And you don't necessarily have to worry about what you're hitting or what you're aiming at. One of the first things you need to do is work on your form and work on the feel. And you may even settle into something that doesn't look like what everybody else does, but if it feels good to you and you can pull back and hit that same spot every time and it feels right, I think that's really important for you to do starting out.
I think those are great points. I guess what I would say is have fun. I mean, when I'm sure Aaron can confirm this, but when you're first starting out, it's and even when you're not first starting out, it can be frustrating. So just remember to have fun shooting a recurve bow, shooting a longbow. It's an absolute blast. It's addictive, and just grab you some arrows, go out there and stump shoot and have fun.
Aaron, what do you got for us?
I'd say above and beyond those points, which it's kind of hard to do one. I would say as Jim had mentioned, proper bow fit and getting comfortable, have fun, but have the right mindset when you go out, especially when you're coming from a compound, kind of like along the lines of what Clay said. Don't look at, obviously playing basketball, whatever, you want to put the ball in the hole. You want to put an animal on the ground, but maybe not focus on that as much. Learning along the way, becoming better along the way, becoming more fit, better animal behavior, while you're out there. So like Clay had said, had fun, but learn along the way. Make it so your second trip is better than your first. You've learned more. Your third, you've learned more than your second. So as you're kind of, making the building blocks, that you're becoming a better hunter and outdoorsman along the way, and having fun. Obviously, it's better than working. So even if you suck and you haven't killed anything, chalk it up. Hey, it's better than swinging a hammer, right? I mean, you're out there having fun and learning about the outdoors.
Fred, what's that one tip you would give to the person who's just starting out with a recurve?
Optimism and have fun. Don't get worked up about it. It's about having a good time, and go out there and have a good time.
Now, before we go, Fred, I let Jim cover Pope and Young. Before we go, give me a plug for my friends over at Nexus Outdoors and Blocker. I know you're a big fan of Blocker.
Yeah, good equipment just helps you stay out in the field longer is the bottom line. And if you're cold or uncomfortable, you're not going to be out there hunting. So, no matter what any of us are using, it's got to be something that we believe in, that we're comfortable with. So, that's paramount to me for anything I'm using, whether it's a bow, whether it's clothing, whether it's, something to detect the wind. Pretty much like all these guys, we pick stuff that we believe in and try and stick with it. We think it makes us more successful in the field. And if you believe in it, like Jim said earlier, that confidence is huge. So, picking stuff that you're confident in makes a huge difference.
And I am a huge believer in all of the brands at Nexus Outdoors. I personally love ScentLock. I love Blocker. I love Oz by ScentLock. So go check out our friends over at Nexus Outdoors. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming on again. With these four guys, this is probably the most wisdom I could ever gather on a podcast at one time. So I appreciate you guys taking time out of your day to come on and talk traditional archery with us.
Enjoyed it.
Thanks, Dylan. This has been a pleasure.
Well, all right, guys. Thanks for coming on, guys. Thanks for listening. You guys have a great week. And again, if you missed any of the episodes in our traditional series, head back there, the last 6 episodes in our series, so you can go back and check all of those out. Thanks for listening. You guys have a great week.